Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Crochet, and today I'll be talking to you about the recovery of Rwanda after the Rwandan genocide, but more specifically about the Gacaca courts that were set up and how we can learn from them philosophically. However, before I get into this topic, I'd first like to introduce myself and give you a bit of information about who I am, what I'm doing, and why I'm doing it. So, I am a second year student at the University of Oxford, studying philosophy and Italian, and I was really drawn to the BizG's micro internship program, mostly because of the mission of BizG's. This mission to tell stories of those in or fleeing conflict, and then in turn raise awareness about the dire, dire and terrible situations that people are in across the world. Um, and I also saw this internship as real opportunity to learn a lot, to learn about communities that I haven't engaged with, to learn the stories of refugees that are truly, truly inspiring, but also to learn about journalism in general. I've been able to learn about different types of journalism, but I've also been able to learn journalistic skills and been able to improve my journalistic style. Um, and yeah, so that's a large part of why I was drawn to this internship. Um, Moving on from that, another question that someone might ask could be, why have I chosen this topic? Um, so I decided to choose this topic of the Gacaca courts because I believe it's a really interesting and important thing to talk about, and ultimately something we as a society could learn from. Um, as a philosophy student, I spend a lot of my time thinking about ethics and morality and principles and how we as individuals should act. What actions should we take? What obligations do we have? But as an extension of that, I also think a lot and write a lot about how states should interact with us. Do states have certain rights over us? Are they allowed to get us to do certain things or act in certain ways? And as an extension of all this, I think a lot about the interaction between morality and justice. And the example of the Gacaca courts is something that really raises a lot of questions about whether we should, well, first of all, raises questions about what justice is, but then also raises questions about how our ideas of morality should interact with our ideas of justice. So, for example, the Gacaca courts raise questions of, should we always stay consistent to what we think is just, or should we let go of some consistency in order to better a society? So this is just one of the moral questions that a discussion of the Gacaca courts raises. Um, so overall, I really wanted to pick this topic because of the interaction with philosophy. And I mean, something as well that really strikes me about this topic is how obviously Rwanda went from an awful event. Some of the worst moral atrocities were committed during the Rwandan genocide. However, in recent years, Rwanda has recovered very well. Rwanda isn't divided in the same way it was. There isn't conflict in Rwanda anymore. So, that's just one of the things that really struck me as well. We've gone from this absolute breakdown of morality and peace to then perhaps quite the opposite in years later. Obviously I acknowledge that Rwanda is far from a perfect country today, but I think we can all agree that there's a stark contrast between the Rwanda of today and the Rwanda of, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So, yeah, and I find that really interesting. So I'm aware I've spoken a lot about myself and my interests so far. So I think now's a good time to actually delve into a discussion about the Gacaca courts. So what actually were the Gacaca courts? Well, they were a temporary justice system set up after the Rwandan genocide. So in the Rwandan genocide, somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people were murdered, most of which were Tutsi people. Tutsi is an ethnic group within Rwanda. However, not everyone murdered in the genocide were part of the Tutsi group, but most of them were. And the genocide was carried out by by so many people. It wasn't just a government operation, but civilians within Rwanda also participated in the genocide. So essentially, Rwanda was in a position when the genocide ended in which they had a backlog of thousands and thousands and thousands of people to put on trial, essentially. And I mean, the established justice system after the genocide cannot handle that many people. It would have taken years and years and years to put everyone through the official process. And whilst people were waiting to be put through the process, they were living in awful conditions and were actually dying whilst waiting for trial. So something had to be done. So the Rwandan government established the Gacaca courts in the early 2000s, 2001, to help deal with people who are accused of participating in the genocide. So the Gacaca courts themselves were local community courts that would take place outside on the grass in villages and towns throughout Rwanda. They're actually based off a traditional system of justice. However, the traditional Gacaca courts were meant to settle more minor disputes in local communities, whereas now we're re-establishing the Gacaca courts because we need to have lots of people tried, and the best way of doing this was put it in the hands of local communities to sort it all out. But not only was this this wasn't only motivated by practicality to do with numbers of accused offenders, but also to help with an agenda of reconciliation. Rwanda, in response to the genocide, took a restorative justice approach rather than a retributive justice approach, which is the one that we have in the UK and much of the Western world. So the important distinction here is the Gacaca courts weren't concerned with accusing people and then just locking them up for years upon years and years and years. That wasn't the focus. Obviously, the Gacaca courts did punish people and put people in prison, but the main focus was on reconciliation, truth, and reintegration, and social cohesion. So by having these community courts, people from the communities, victims could come to the court to watch a hearing, provide evidence, but also to have some form of dialogue with an offender. And this interaction between victim, offender, and justice system curated an environment in which social cohesion could be achieved. So I suppose it did that in the sense with how victims were provided with answers for what happened. They knew who committed which crimes. They knew who wronged them. But also it provided offenders with an opportunity to confess and show remorse. Because, we must recognize there are different degrees within offenders of the genocide. Not everyone implicated in the genocide actually murdered people. They were still obviously involved, but maybe they destroyed property, which is obviously still a crime. But people like this were able to confess and tell victims they were sorry. And this, like I say, this dialogue really helped reconciliation and promoted social social cohesion. So in taking this all into account, I think the thing I want to stress in my article and with my podcast today is what can we learn from this? Obviously, we do not have a justice system like this, and many would argue in the UK our justice system does not work. People reoffend. Victims are sometimes left without answers, without feeling like they've been heard, and ultimately, our system just it has a big emphasis on like an eye for an eye. It's like revenge based, and this doesn't help a society feel unified. If anything, it divides a society. So I suppose what I'm saying is the use of the Gacaca courts really allows us to question our own systems. And that's not me saying that the Gacaca courts were perfect. Perhaps some people feel like justice wasn't enacted because people weren't punished as harshly as they should have been. I don't know, but I think the important part here is that there's this acknowledgement of different systems and merits of different ways of dealing with justice, principle, and morality. And I mean, obviously, we have to accept that the Gacaca courts didn't solve all of Rwanda's problems. Rwanda today is under authoritarian control, which is perhaps a big reason why there's social cohesion in Rwanda today. And and that's another question in itself. Is I suppose, are the cons of authoritarian control worth the pros of social cohesion? And I'm not sure. And I guess what I want to say is, though, my mission here is not to be prescriptive. I'm not trying to decide what is best, what is worst, what different states and countries and people should do, but rather to open up the space for dialogue and questioning and just thinking in general. Just want to re-emphasize that's my agenda with all this. I want to be able to provide people with an explanation of the recovery from the Rwandan genocide. I want to, tell people how Rwanda had quite a remarkable recovery, in part down to the in large part down to the Gacaca courts. But I most of all want to create a discourse around what we deem to be right, and what we want from our justice system. And also, I want people to think about what trade-offs should we take, where should we draw lines, and what sort of society do we want. So that's all from me from this podcast. I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you enjoy reading the article. Thank you.